having some years ago during a pilgrimage to the holy city of Jerusalem, gained admission to the courts of the ancient temple of the Knights Templars, which still exists in Mount Moriah in a perfect state of preservation as a Muslim mosque, and having visited many of the ruined fortresses and castles of the ancient order of the temple, whose shattered walls are still to be seen at intervals in Palestine and in Syria, from Gaza to Antioch, and from the mountains of the Dead Sea to the shores of the Mediterranean, I naturally became greatly interested in the history of the order and in the numerous remains and memorials of the Knights Templars still to be met with in various stages of decay and ruin in almost every part of Europe. The recent restoration of the Temple Church at London, the most beautiful and the best preserved of all the ancient ecclesiastical edifices of the western provinces of the temple, first suggested to me the idea of writing a short historical account of the varied fortunes of that great religious and military fraternity of knights and monks, by whom it was erected, and of their dark and terrible end. The end. The end. Born during the first fervor of the Crusaders, the Templars were flattered and aggrandized as long as their great military power, and religious fanaticism could be made available for the support of the Eastern Church. And the retention of the Holy Land. But when the Crescent had ultimately triumphed over the Cross, and the religious and military enthusiasm of Christendom had died away, they encountered the basis ingratitude in return for the services they had rendered. To the Christian faith, and were plundered, persecuted, and condemned to a cruel death by those who ought in justice to have been their defenders and supporters. The memory of these holy warriors is involved in all our recollections of the wars of the cross. They were the bulwarks of the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem during the short period of its existence, and were the last band of Europe's host that contended for the possession. The last band of Europe's host that contended for the possession of Palestine, To the vows of the monk and the austere life of the convent, they added the discipline of the camp and the stern duties of the military life, joining the fine vocation of the sword and lance with the holy seal and the body-bending toil of a poor brotherhood, poor brotherhood, the vulgar notion that they were as wicked, as they were fearless and brave, has not yet been entirely exploded. But it is hoped that the copious account of the proceedings against the order in this country, given in the ensuing volume, will dispel many unfounded prejudices still entertained against the fraternity, and excite emotions emotions of admiration. Emotions of admiration. For their constancy and courage, and of pity for their unmerited and cruel fate. Unmerited and cruel fate. Cruel fate. It's a cruel fate. The accounts even of the best of the ancient historians concerning the Templars ought not to be implicitly relied upon. William of Tyre, for instance, tells us that Nasser ed-Din, son of Sultan Abbas, was taken prisoner by the Templars, and whilst in their hands became a convert to Christianity, that he had learned the rudiments of the Latin language and earnestly sought to be baptized, but that the Templars were bribed and with 60,000 pieces of gold to surrender him to his enemies in Egypt, where certain death awaited them, and that they stood by to see him bound hand and foot with chains and placed in an iron cage, to be conducted across to the desert to Cairo. The Arabian historians, on the other hand, tell us that Nasser ed-Din and his father murdered the Caliph, threw his body into a well, and then fled into Palestine. That the sister of the murdered Caliph wrote immediately to the commander of the garrison of the Knights Templars at Gaza, offering a handsome reward for the capture of the fugitives. That they were accordingly intercepted at Nasser ed-Din was sent to Cairo, and Nasser ed-Din was sent to Cairo, where the female relations of the Caliph caused his body to be cut into pieces. Cut into pieces! In the Seraglio! The above act has constantly been made a matter of grave accusation against the Templars. But what a different complexion does the case assume on the testimony of the Arabian authorities! It must be remembered that William, Archbishop of Tyre, was hostile to the order on account of its vast powers and privileges. Oh, vast powers and privileges. Oh. It must be remembered that William, Archbishop of Tyre, was hostile to the order on account of his vast powers and privileges, and carried his complaints to a general council of the church at Rome. He is abandoned in everything that he says to the prejudice of the fraternity by James of Vitry, Bishop of Acre, a learned and most talented prelate who wrote in Palestine subsequently to William of Tyre, and has copied largely from the history of the latter. The Bishop of Acre speaks of the Templars in the highest terms and declares that they were universally loved, loved by all men for their piety and humility. The celebrated Orientalist von Hammer has recently brought forward various extraordinary and unfounded charges destitute of all authority against the Templars, and Wilkie, who has written a German history of the order, seems to have imbibed all the vulgar prejudices against the fraternity. I might have added to the interest of the ensuing work by making the Templars horrible and atrocious villains. But I have endeavored to write a fair, a fair and impartial account of the order. Not slavishly adopting everything I find. No, detailed in ancient writers, but such matters only as I believe, I believe, after a careful examination of the best authorities to be true. I believe, after a careful examination of the best authorities to be true. The favorable reception given to the first edition of the ensuing work, and the interest that was taken in the extraordinary and romantic career of the Knights Templars induced me to publish a second edition greatly enlarged and to introduce various collateral matters of an antiquarian and local character interesting only to a comparatively small number of readers. This enlarged edition having been exhausted, it occurred to me in preparing a third edition for the press that the work might be materially shortened and reduced in price without in any wise detracting from its value and interest as a record of the chief events of one of the most remarkable and interesting periods of history and of the extraordinary and romantic achievements of the first and most ancient of the religious military orders of knights and monks established during the Crusades. The dry matters of detail of local and partial interest which interfered with the continuity of the main narrative have been struck out of the body of the work, and the more striking incidents of the history have been thus brought into greater prominence. The long Latin and French extracts from the old chronicles have also been discarded from the notes, but the historical references have been preserved to enable the reader, if he thinks fit, to study the quaint and curious language of the originals by these means, and by enlarging the size of the page, the work has been compressed into a smaller compass, and the price reduced nearly one half. It is hoped that these alterations will be found to be improvements in a temple, December 8th, 1851. I go forth to battle and employ your substance and your persons for the advancement of God's religion. Verily, God loveth those who fight for his religion in battle array. Quran, chapter 56, entitled Battle Array. O Prophet, stir up the faithful to war. If 20 of you persevere with constancy, they shall overcome 200. And if there be 100 of you, they shall overcome 1,000 of those who believe not. Chapter 8, entitled The Spoils. Verily, if God pleased, he could take vengeance on the unbelievers without your assistance. Verily. But he commanded you to fight his battles, that he may prove the one of you by the other, and as those who fight in defense of God's true religion, God will not suffer their works to perish. Quran, chapter 47, entitled War. To be propagated by the sword was a vital principle of Mohammedanism. War against infidels for the establishment and extension of the faith was commanded by the prophet. And the solemn injunction became hallowed and perpetuated by success. A century after the death of Mahomet, the Muslims had extended the religion and their arms from India to the Atlantic Ocean. They had subdued and converted by the power of the sword Persia and Egypt, and all the north of Africa, from the mouth of the Nile to the extreme western boundary of the vast continent. They overran Spain, invaded France, and turning their footsteps toward Italy, they entered the kingdoms of Naples and Genoa, threatened Rome, and subjected the island of Sicily to the laws and the religion of their prophet. But at the very period when they were about to plant the Quran in the very heart of Europe, and were advancing with rapid strides to universal dominion, intestine measures broke out amongst them, which undermined their power, and Europe was released from the dread and danger of the Saracen dominion. In the 10th century of the Christian era, however, the ferocious and barbarous Turkomans appeared as the patrons of Mohammedanism and the propagators of the Quran. These were wild pastoral tribes of shepherds and hunters who descended from the frozen plains to the north of the Caspian, conquered Persia, embraced the religion and the law of Mahomet, and became united under the standard of the prophet into one great and powerful nation. They overran the greater part of the Asheri continent, destroyed the churches of the Christians, and the temples of the pagans and appeared AD 1084, 1084 in warlike array on the Asiatic shore of the Hellespont in front of Constantinople. The terrified Emperor Alexius sent urgent letters to the Pope and the Christian princes of Europe, exhorting them to assist him and their common Christianity in the perilous crisis. The preachings of Peter, the hermit, and the exhortations of the Pope. For with aroused Christendom, Europe was armed and precipitated upon Asia. The Turkish power was broken, and the Christian provinces of the Greek Empire of Constantinople were recovered from the grasp of the infidels. And the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem was reared upon the ruins of the Turkish Empire of Sultan Soliman. The monastic and military order of the temple was then called into existence for the purpose of checking the power of the infidels and fighting the battles of Christendom in the plains of Asia. Suggested by fanaticism, as Gibbon observes, but guided by unintelligent and far-reaching policy, it became the firmest bulwark of Christianity in the East and mainly contributed to preserve Europe from Turkish desolation and probably from Turkish conquest. Many grave and improbable charges have been brought against the Templar by monks and priests who wrote to Europe concerning events in the Holy Land and who regarded the vast privileges of the order. The vast privileges of the order with indignation and aversion. Matthew Paris tells us that they were leagued with the infidels and fought pitched battles with the rival order of St. John, but as contemporary historians of Palestine, who describe the exploits of the Templars and were eyewitness of their career. Contemporary historians of Palestine, who describe the exploits of the Templars and were eyewitness of their career, make no mention of such occurrences, and as no allusion is made to them in the letters of the Pope, addressed to the Grand Master of the Order of St. John, shortly after the date of these pretended battles. I have omitted all mentions of them. Feeling convinced. After a careful examination of the best authorities, that they never did take place. Never. At this distant day, when the times and scenes in which the Templars acted are changed, and the deep religious fervor and warm fresh feelings of bygone ages, deep religious fervor and warm fresh feelings of bygone ages have given way to a cold and calculating philosophy. We may doubt the sincerity of the military friars, exclaim against their credulity and deride their zeal. But when we call to mind the hardships and fatigues, the dangers, sufferings, and the death which they voluntarily devoted themselves in a far distant land, sacrifice of personal comforts of the time of kindred, and of all the endearments of domestic life, which they made without any prospect of worldly gain, without any prospect. No! Which they made without any prospect. Which they made without any prospect of worldly gain. Which they made without any prospect of worldly gain or temporal advantage. Which they made without any prospect of worldly gain or temporal advantage. For objects which they believed to be just, and noble, and righteous. We must ever wreck the generous impulses, generous impulses, by which they were actuated among the sublime emotions, sublime emotions, which can influence the human character in those periods when men feel rather than calculate, before knowledge has chilled. Sublime emotions which can influence the human character in those periods when men feel rather than calculate, before knowledge has chilled the sensibility, or selfish indifference hardened the heart. The pilgrimage is yet, midst her towering fanes in ruin laid, the pilgrim saint his murmuring vespers paid. 'Twas his to mount the tufted rocks and rove the checkered twilight of the olive grove. 'Twas his to bend beneath a sacred gloom, and wherewith many a kiss Messiah's tomb. The natural desire of visiting those holy spots, which have been sanctified by the praises and rendered memorable by the sufferings of the Son of God, drew during the early ages of Christianity crowds of devout worshippers and pilgrims to Jerusalem. Among the most illustrious and enthusiastic of the many wanderers to the holy city was the Empress Helena, the mother of Constantine, who, with the warm feelings of a recent conversion, visited in person every place and every object in Palestine associated with the memory of him who died for mankind, on the blessed cross. With a holy zeal and a lively enthusiasm, she attempted to fix by unquestionable tradition the scene of each memorable event in the gospel narrative, and Christendom is indebted to her for the real or pretended discovery, about 298 years after the birth of Christ, of the Holy Sepulchre. Over this sacred monument, the Empress and her son Constantine caused to be erected the magnificent Church of the Resurrection. Or as it is now called, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And they adorned all those places in the Holy Land which remind us most forcibly of the early existence and death of Jesus Christ, with magnificent churches and religious houses. The example of this pious princess and the pretended discoveries made by her of holy relics caused a great increase in the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. The conquest of Palestine by the Arabians AD 637 stimulated rather than suppressed them. It added to the merit by increasing the danger and difficulty of the undertaking, while the enthusiasm which prompted the long and perilous journey was increased by the natural feelings of sorrow and indignation at the loss of the holy places, and the possession of them by the conquering infidels. Year after year, and century after century, hundreds and thousands of both sexes, of all ranks at every age, the monarch and the peasant, the noble and the beggar, flocked to the shrines and the altars of the Palestine. They visited with pious affection, Bethlehem, where the Savior first saw the light. They bathed in the waters of the river Jordan, where he was baptized, and wept and prayed upon Mount Calvary, where he was crucified. On the conquest of Jerusalem by the Arabians, the security of the Christian population had been provided for in a solemn guarantee given under the hand and seal of the Caliph Omar to Sophronius, the Patriarch. 1/4 of the entire city, with the Church of the Resurrection, the Holy Sepulchre, and the Grey Latin Convent, had been left in the hands of the Christians, and the pilgrims were permitted, on payment of a trifling tribute, freely to visit the various objects of their regard. When the scepter was transferred from the family of the Abbasids to the Fatimids, and the Caliphs of Egypt obtained possession of Palestine, the same mild and tolerant government was continued. In the 11th century, the seal of pilgrimage had reached its height, and the caravans of pilgrims had become so numerous as to be styled the armies of the Lord. The old and the young, women and children flocked in crowds to Jerusalem. And in the year 1064, the Holy Sepulchre was visited by an enthusiastic band of 7,000 pilgrims. The year following, however, Jerusalem was conquered by the wild Turkomans. 3,000 of the citizens were massacred, and the command over the Holy City and territory was confided to the Omir Ortok, the chief of a savage pastoral tribe. Under the iron yoke of these fierce northern strangers, the Christians were fearfully oppressed. They were driven from their churches. Divine worship was ridiculed and interrupted. And the patriarch of the holy city was dragged by the hair of his head over the sacred pavement of the Church of the Resurrection and cast into a dungeon to extort a ransom from the sympathy of his flock. The pilgrims who, through innumerable perils, had reached the gates of the holy city were plundered, imprisoned, and frequently massacred. A piece of gold was exacted at the price of admission to the Holy Sepulchre, and many, unable to pay the tax, were driven by the swords of the Turkomans from the very threshold of the object of all their hopes, the bourne of their long pilgrimage, and were compelled to retrace their weary steps in sorrow and anguish to their distant homes. The intelligence of these cruelties aroused the religious chivalry of Christendom. A nerve was touched of exquisite feeling, and the sensation vibrated to the heart of Europe. Then arose the wild enthusiasm of the Crusades, and men of all ranks, and even monks and priests, animated by the exhortation of the Pope and the preachings of Peter the Hermit, flew to arms and enthusiastically undertook the pious and glorious enterprise of rescuing the Holy Sepulchre of Christ from the foul abominations of the heathen. When intelligence of the capture of Jerusalem by the Crusaders, AD 1099, had been conveyed to Europe, the seal of pilgrimage blazed forth with increased fierceness. It had gathered intensity from the interval of its suppression by the wild Turkomans and promiscuous crowds of both sexes, old men and children, virgins and matrons, thinking the road then open and the journey practicable. Successively pressed forwards towards the holy city. The infidels had indeed been driven out of Jerusalem, but not out of Palestine.